Hey everybody, welcome back to Sweatpants BI. This is part 5 of our full-length HR report walkthrough. And in this video, I'm just going to be taking the design that we've created for our background layout and integrating that with the visuals that we've already stood up around employee headcount so that we can make a really impressive employee headcount page for our HR report. So it's pretty simple. We're just going to be jumping back and forth between PowerPoint and Power BI a little bit and making sure that the visuals in our Power BI report are fully integrated with our design and our color scheme so that we're building something that really looks amazing while also sort of telling the story around employee headcount. So let's go ahead and jump back into Power BI and get to it. So now that we've got all of our data visuals pretty well laid out across the 3 main pages of our report, let's go ahead and start formatting the first page here for headcount. And of course, we're going to be carrying through this sort of orange color that we have as our color accent in the top left corner here. And we're going to be using just this orange color and primarily the color gray throughout our report. So we want to sort of condition our users to the color orange, reflecting the most important insights that they need to look at throughout the tool. So we're going to be starting with sort of this half of the page, and we're just going to get this formatted pretty quickly. I'm going to go ahead and kind of move the rest of my visuals roughly to where they are going to be in the finished version of the report. And of course, the first thing that I really want users to see when they join this page is this slider, which is going to help them select a time frame, and this card that shows the head count at any given point in time for the rest of the report. So this is going to provide them the context for all of these other visuals. We want the user to know right out of the gate that all of these other visuals are basically taking this headcount number and breaking it down by different layers or fields within the data. So we really want to make sure that before the user sees anything else, they're laser focused on this slider and this headcount card. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop one more shape just directly into Power BI. Yes, you could absolutely do this in PowerPoint as well, but just for the sake of expedience, I'm just going to go ahead and drop this new shape right here directly into Power BI. And I'm going to go ahead and format this shape by giving it, let's say, 20% rounded corners. The only thing that I'm trying to do is make sure that the rounded corners of this shape are roughly equivalent to the rounded corners of this shape in my background, just to sort of keep things symmetrical. Now I'm going to go into my style settings, and I'm going to give this the same kind of orange color pop that I have in other areas of my report, so that the user's eyes are really going to be drawn to this section first and foremost. And I don't really need a border. If you want to experiment with something like adding a drop shadow to this, that is something that you can kind of play with. Let's go ahead and see what a shadow looks like. Overall, not bad. Drop shadows are primarily used, in case you're curious, just to kind of make something or some stylistic element in the report kind of leap off the page. Literally, we're sort of playing with depth and creating this illusion that this is in the foreground where everything else is in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this drop shadow on this new shape that we've dropped in. Now I'm going to go to Format, and I'm going to send this shape to the background so that my slider now it overlaps or is on top of the layer of this sort of rounded corner rectangle in the back. So let's go ahead now and sort of resize everything. And the first thing that I'm going to do with this slider, which we're going to update first, is I'm going to go to my effects, and I'm going to turn off the background. And I'm also going to go to properties, and I'm going to go to advanced options and turn off the responsive setting, which just changes the sort of circular dials on this slider to just something a little bit more subtle there. And now I'm just going to quickly go through and update the formatting on my slider. Let's go ahead and give the 2013 and 2019, let's give those a white background so that they stand out a little bit more. And if you want to do something like changing the slider, to white, let's even see what it looks like. We're just going to play with some of our other colors here. We want it to be subtle, but we also want it to be very clear to the user which time frame they're looking at. I think I'm more partial to just having kind of a dark gray there, so we'll just run with that for now. I'm going to go ahead and pop back to my values. One thing that I forgot to do is I'm going to use DIN, which is a highly readable font. I'm going to use that as my primary font throughout the report. And I'm also going to go ahead and give this slider a more interesting header than just year. Yes, it's obvious to the users that all they're doing is manipulating years here by dragging this slider. But we also want to provide, instruction where we can. So let's go ahead and change the header here to pick a time frame for the report. And of course, you can see that it kind of runs off a little bit. So you can try making it a little bit smaller, or you can just sort of make the visual a little bit larger. I'm going to kind of bump this over to the side. Now, we need to go ahead and get this card formatted because this card is one of the most important numbers, if not the most important number on this particular page. So let's go ahead and head over to our general settings. And once again, the first thing that we want to do is just turn off this background. And I'm also going to go ahead and turn off the category label. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a white font color. And let's go ahead and just make this as large as we can make it. You can even play with bolding it a little bit, but I think that might be a little bit overkill. Now, what we really want to do here is we want to give this card an interesting title that sort of tells users exactly what they're looking at in the remainder of the report. So for this, we're going to create a conditional or data-driven title, which is pretty easy to do. Let's just go over here to New Measure, and we're going to create a new measure called Current Headcount Title, and this is going to look something like this. What is our head count as of? And now we want to add a data-driven element to this measure, and so we're going to say as of the max selected year. Because if you'll remember, our head count measure is written in such a way that it's always going to be calculating a head count based on the maximum year over here, not the minimum year, just the maximum year. Because basically it's going to look for all people who were hired before 2019 who have not since left the company. And once we have that part, we're going to go ahead and close this off with a question mark because that's how we're sort of phrasing this question. So what is our head count as of, in this case, 2019? And we're going to end it with a question mark. And I'm going to go to General, I'm going to turn on my title, and I'm going to click on Conditional Formatting, indicating that I want to use a measure as my title. I'm going to find my current headcount title, click OK, and now I'm just going to kind of resize this. And I'm just going to take a moment and kind of line everything up. I'm realizing that I can even make this just a little bit smaller. Now let's go ahead and change our title to italics, and I'm going to give it a white text. I'm going to kind of move it over here a little bit so that this text doesn't run into this text. And now that I know that I have this much room, let's pop back over here to our header, and let's just kind of, make this a little bit more similar. And make it just a touch larger, and what I'm really trying to do is kind of line up this text with this text. Okay, and now we're good. So now we can start turning our attention to some of the other data visuals. And most of the stylistic choices that we're going to be making are going to be focused on eliminating any kinds of redundant or obvious data labels. And we're going to try to direct the user's attention to the most important parts of any given data visual, which for a lot of these bar charts, we're going to want the users to start looking up here at sort of the largest areas of headcount by department, by job level, by work style or location, what have you. So let's go ahead and start with this first bar chart. And the reason that we're going to start here is that we will actually be able to leverage some of the formatting options on this chart here and here, because these are very similar types of bar charts. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to just eliminate entirely the numbers on our x-axis, and we're just going to directly label these bars here with data labels. So let's go ahead and turn on our data labels. Let's go ahead and make the values DIN, and let's go ahead and pump up their size just a little bit. Now let's go ahead and turn off our x-axis. We can also get rid of the title here, since it's already obvious that we're talking about headcount based on everything else that we've already formatted up here. And now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm noticing these sort of warning icons here. And what's causing those is a really annoying setting in Power BI called the responsive setting on data visuals. I hate it, but it is on by default a lot of the time. So let's go ahead and go to General, Properties, Advanced Options, and let's turn off that responsive setting. What the responsive setting does is it allows Power BI to sort of take control of the size of fonts and sort of the spacing of different objects based on how large you've made the visual. I like to micromanage every single pixel of my Power BI reports, so I hate that that feature kind of takes away my power to format this the way that I like, so I usually just turn it off. Now, if we're looking at this visual and it's currently called Headcount by Department, it's pretty obvious then that what is on our y-axis here is department. I think it's a little bit redundant or unnecessary to leave that title on, so let's go ahead and turn that off. And then I'm also noticing this ellipsis here indicates that administration and product development are being cut off a little bit here. So while we're in our y-axis settings, let's go ahead and just change our max area width. We're going to increase that to 50% so that none of our department names are being cut off. And now let's go ahead and head down to our bars. And let's go ahead and instead of using like an orange font or a gray font, if we really want to direct users' attention to like the top bars up here, we're going to add some conditional formatting here. I like to add a middle color so that I can really focus people's attention on these highest values. So let's just go ahead and select kind of a light gray for the low and middle value, and we'll use our highlight color of orange for just the highest values. And that's going to make sure that really just software and sales get spotlighted here. Sometimes creating conditional formatting does automatically generate this headcount legend here, where you can see it's kind of a scale of our colors here from our lowest value to our highest value. I'm just going to turn that off. And now we're going to go back to our bars. We're going to add just a little bit more padding between our bars, basically just kind of shrinking them down, making them a little bit more nondescript. And one other thing that I'm noticing that I forgot to do was change my y-axis fonts to DIN. So let's just go ahead and do that, since that's the font that I settled on for this report. Now I'm going to go to General, and I'm going to add just a very, very subtle boundary or border to this visual, just enough so that a user doesn't accidentally think that any of these visuals, are part of the same visual. I want to create a very, sort of clean, border or boundary between my different data visuals over here, but not something that's going to, really stand out too much or possibly be a distraction. And the last touch that I'm going to make here is I'm going to go ahead and give this a slightly more interesting title, such as which departments have the most employees. Now I'm going to shrink that down just enough to sort of fit it all on one line. And that first visual is done. And now to make my life easier over here, I'm just going to click on this visual, grab my paintbrush, click on that, and now that visual is also almost formatted perfectly. So let's just real quickly go ahead and go to this visual. One thing that I don't like is that most of my data labels here are cut off. So let's go to our data labels and change the values for the display units from auto to none, which is going to allow me to see the full number. And now let's change our title to Headcount by job level. You can even make this a little bit smaller. There we go. And now I'm just going to go ahead and copy some of my formatting over to this visual. Didn't really help too much with anything but the title and data label formatting. So let's go ahead and just quickly clean this up. And I'm just going to call, instead of calling this like head count by location, let's just call it by location. By now I'm pretty sure that everyone is conditioned to understand that all of these visuals are just showing head count. So I'll just change that to by location. I'm definitely going to want to have a legend turned on here, but I probably don't need the title. So let's go ahead and experiment with what this looks like if I do top left stacked. And now let's go ahead and turn our data labels from showing 2 decimal places to just 0. For a lot of instances, it's possible to sort of over precision your data labels. Honestly, the real story here is just that 80% of our employees are remote and 20% are on site. Adding 2 decimal places to show, 79.72%, that extra precision is probably not very meaningful. So we're not going to use any additional decimal places there. And once we have that formatting, let's go ahead and update our columns. The real headline here is that 80% of our employees are remote. So that's where we're going to use our color pop. And for on-site, we'll just let that be kind of gray, just enough to where someone can see it, but everyone understands that the real highlight here is the sheer volume of or percentage of remote employees at the company. And last but not least, let's go ahead and update our map here so that it sort of fits the rest of our aesthetic. And I'm going to give it sort of the same border, very light with sort of a 10 pixel rounded corner. You can go ahead and change the title to in which cities, or let's see, which cities have the highest head count. I'm going to drop that down to a 13 font. And now we just want to reformat this map super quickly. There's not a whole lot that we need to do here. Adding something like category labels is honestly just going to make this unnecessarily cluttered. So let's just go to our map settings, and instead of using road or light, we're going to use grayscale, sort of preserving that gray and orange aesthetic that we have here. Then I'm going to go to bubbles, and I'm going to use my color pop here so that people can clearly see where we have data and in which cities around the country. And because these bubbles are pretty tiny and it might be a little bit hard for someone to just immediately see these sort of concentrations of employees in San Francisco and LA, instead of using -10 size, let's try just using 0 to make that stand out a little bit more. And if you even wanted to go as high as like 10 or something, just to make it even more obvious, I could definitely see someone, trying to see if they can get away with that. So now everything on our left is pretty well taken care of. So let's just quickly go through and sort of update this section that we had reserved primarily for breaking down our current head count. by employee demographics. So let's just go over here and we're going to add another item directly within Power BI. And this is just going to be a text box. Let's go ahead and turn off the background here. Let's go ahead and choose DIN as our font. And let's see if we can make 14 work. But now what we want to do is we want to say, how does headcount compare by different employee demographics? And we might even want to see if we can get away with 16, which it looks like we can. So what we really want to do here in this new sort of, section header that we're giving for this sort of gray area that we've called out on this half of the page is we want to make sure that people are able to sort of consume this text super quickly. So let's go ahead and see if we can call out our head count and employee demographics. And you can see right now I've bolded it. I'm going to go ahead and kind of move these down so that we can really focus on the effect that we're getting here. Just by bolding headcount and employee demographics, someone who is looking at this section, their eyes are immediately kind of drawn to this area. Something that we can do to even maximize this effect more is to really darken headcount and employee demographics here. If we want to use a color pop instead of just darkening, this orange that we have selected as our highlight color is probably not going to stand out terribly well against this gray background. So if we want to use color, what I would recommend is going to more colors and seeing if we can take our orange color and just darken it up a little bit. So let's see what that looks like. Might even try getting over into this area. There we go. So now we can see our orange, but it's dark enough that it's legible against this gray background that we chose. And I'm just going to use the same orange over here. So that looks pretty decent. Now we need to go through and just update all of our data visuals down here. And if you want, you can even continue to borrow some of the formatting choices that we've already made over here and just copy them over super quickly. So I'm just going to use my format paintbrush and I'm going to copy it down to this bar chart, which makes sense. And I'm also going to copy that formatting over to this bar chart. Now I'm going to go ahead just super quickly and I'm going to turn off this white background that I have here because the white background works just fine over here, but it's a little bit too much for this sort of section that I've called out over here. And I want people to sort of see this area as something distinct from this area. So instead of using this white background, I'm going to actually increase the transparency and let's try 75 and see how that works. And if we want to, we can also, while we're here, go ahead and shrink things down a little bit more. You can see I've got kind of a rounded corner boundary there, which is what I wanted. And you might even want to just darken up your font a little bit more on your axis. And let's go ahead and give this a title while we're here. We're still talking about head count, and this one's going to be by education level. And I also want to make sure that I'm seeing my full data label again. So let's drop down values for our data labels. Let's change it from auto to none so that I can actually see the full data value. And let's even try overflowing the text, which in this case didn't do anything. I was hoping that it would pull this number back into my bar, but it didn't. But that's totally fine for now. We might be able to resize this in just a moment and have that work out. Now I'm going to go ahead and recopy the formatting changes that I made here and bring them over to this visual. And I'm just going to kind of resize everything super quickly so that I can keep sort of finishing up this bar chart. And because this is a bar chart showing, the clustering of our head count by age, I don't necessarily want to make all of the same formatting choices here that I'm making down here. In fact, there are just too many bars here for me to use my data labels. So let's go ahead and drop over to our data labels. And let's turn off our data labels entirely. And I'm actually going to turn my y-axis back on. And I'm going to format it for DIN. I'm going to increase the size to 11 so that people can see here is my head count and here are my ages. If you're a little bit confused that having two numerical values for our x-axis and y-axis is confusing, no problem. This is a situation where I could totally understand someone wanting to label an axis. I'm just going to use a slightly lighter gray just to sort of suppress that label to the background. And now, because the new kind of light gray background that I've chosen for my visuals might be making these bars just a touch difficult to read, let's go back to our columns and update our conditional formatting with a darker gray that just helps this information stand out a little bit more. And while we're here, let's also give this a title of by age. Now we're going to focus on our donut charts. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over some of my formatting changes. And you can see right now I've got a pretty ugly donut chart, or at least hard to read. It's not labeled. We don't know what any of this is, but no problem. We can fix that in just a second. Since this is the first visual reading left to right, top to bottom, I'm going to go ahead and include head count in the title here and call this visual head count by gender. And now let's go ahead and update the formatting on our donut chart. We want to make sure that we're showing data labels, but we also want to make sure that people can read this. And right now, this still isn't really telling us exactly what we're looking at. So instead of using data label and percent of total, or data value and percent of total, let's use category and percent of total so that we can see 55.5% of the head count that we're looking at is male, about 44% are female, and then we have a very, very small percentage of people who identify as other. So let's go ahead and drop our values. Once again, having these additional decimal places is probably not terribly useful, or at the very least, there's not much more that we can glean from that additional precision. So instead of wasting space with those decimals, let's go ahead and just drop this to 0 decimal places, which makes it much easier to see. 56% of the employees are male, 44% are female, and not even 1% identify as other. Now, let's go ahead and focus on our slices. Really, what we want to call out here is the majority value, which is male. We're going to go ahead and make our female values kind of a dark gray, just enough that you can make them out. And for other, we'll select the lightest gray that we have. And now, if you want to, you can even experiment with rotating the visual just enough to make sure that all of the labels and the percentages have enough room to clearly show. And if you want to, once again, we can save a little bit of our time here by just clicking on this visual. And we're just going to copy our formatting selections to this visual. And we're going to open up our data labels. One thing that doesn't come through when we're copying the formatting is our decimal precision. So let's go ahead and just drop this to 0 decimal places. And now I'm going to select both of these. And if you want to, you can also experiment with the width of the donut or the size of the opening in the middle. So I like to set my inner radius to around 70%. Just something a little bit more subtle. We can still read the data visual perfectly clearly. And so now we're basically just left with one more visual that we need to reformat here. And that is our stacked 100% bar chart here that breaks down head count by race. So very quickly, I'm just going to go to General, and I'm going to select Properties, Advanced Options. I'm going to turn off the responsive setting. One thing that is here that we definitely don't need is our head count label, since it's already obvious that we're talking about head count. So let's go ahead and just turn off our x-axis title. That gives us just a little bit more room with our percentages here. And let's go ahead and change our background to the same as our other visuals, which is 75% transparency with a visual border with 10 pixel rounded corners and a very, very light boundary. And it looks like I have enough room to sort of multi-select and move everything over to the middle just a little bit. I also have room to make this middle stacked bar chart just a little bit larger. At the end of the day, the only thing that I'm trying to do here is just really maximize my spacing. Now I'm going to go to my title, and this visual is going to be breaking down head count by race and ethnicity. Want to make sure that it's DIN, size 13 font, italicized just like everything else. Since I'm already saying by race and ethnicity here, that should make it obvious that that's what my legend values are, so I don't need a title on my legend. And for my x-axis values, I'm going to go ahead and select DIN again. Increase the font size there, make it dark enough that it stands out. And now I'm just very, very quickly going to go through my bars and try to find a color scheme that will work here. So let's go ahead and first we notice that the vast majority of the employees are Caucasian. So this is what we're really going to want to spotlight. So real quickly, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to make everything grayscale. And I'm going to go ahead and make Caucasian orange. And now I'm going to try to find the next largest bar, which is Asian here. So let's just go ahead and make that kind of a light orange. And then the next largest value is African American. So I'm going to make that an even lighter orange. And then for the other values, I'm just going to let those kind of fall into the background by being various shades of gray. Looks like Native American is actually my next largest value, followed by Hispanic, followed by other, which fades into my background a little bit. So I might even try making that just white. And okay, that makes everything look in pretty good shape for our headcount report. I know that was a longer video, but the good news is that since we've already established most of our formatting standards, retention and turnover should go much faster because we can continue to just copy our formatting selections from these visuals over to similar visuals on these other pages. So it should go much faster. Next, we're going to be applying our same formatting choices to the retention page.